Let's be honest. When you think of a high school dropout, you might think of some social deviant, a menace to society, somebody who couldn't even bother to open a school book. However, there's a new report out that sheds a very different and a very troubling light when it comes to the young kids who do, in fact, call it quits. Earlier, I spoke with Wendy Lecker. Wendy is a senior attorney for the Campaign for Fiscal Equity project about why so many teens actually quit and why she thinks it's not only happening, but what ought to be done about it. What should be the big takeaway from the report? Because it was pretty comprehensive. They went to many different communities, talking to a lot of these at-risk kids. We look at all the numbers, but we don't always ask why. What do you think the biggest takeaway from the report is?
I think there are a few. I think that's one of them. I think when we talk about, in the public and political discourse, we talk about schools, we all tend to focus on numbers, test scores, graduation rates, and rarely do we talk about those kids behind the numbers and the lives, the lives they experience. In fact, worse than ignoring their experiences, sometimes we hear politicians and education reformers dismiss them as excuses. Oh, these are just excuses. And I think the big takeaway from this report is that those life experiences that these reformers dismiss as excuses are the very barriers to success in school and to success in life later on, these traumas that these kids experience.
So let's give some of the consistent themes here that are barriers to getting that degree. Almost all of them, it seems, it's that there's an unstable household, right?
Right, or they live in an area where there's a lot of violence. Like you said, there's homelessness, all the toxic stress that accompanies poverty. Sometimes there's a lot of abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse. Sometimes these children have to drop out of school in order to support their family. Their single parent falls ill, and they have the one child. I think his father was in prison. His mother had cancer. He had to leave to become a roofer. So there's a lot of, and usually I think what it says here is that there's a constellation, a cluster of factors that lead to it. I think you also have to understand that it's a long-term process. Scientists have found that toxic stress, when experienced in children, has lasting effects. Some stress is always good for kids, positive stress, but at some point it crosses the line. And with many vulnerable children, children who experience neglect, poverty, violence, instability in their homes, not only does it affect them as young children in that it impairs their development of their brains, the very part of their brains that affect learning, but it also has lasting effects in adolescence. They are unable to develop coping strategies. They tend to engage in more risky behaviors that later lead to dropouts.
Let's say for this conversation we can agree, and hopefully everybody at home is on the same page, that it's in our national best interest to have as many kids graduate as possible. Then the debate comes, well, how do you go about doing that? And you know, I became aware about this report really through a column that you wrote that I read in the Stanford Advocate. I remember I was in New Jersey and dealing after the Abbott decision, which had to do with equity in terms of funding per pupil for the different school districts, and it wouldn't be predicated, right?
We litigated
right, exactly. It wouldn't be predicated for the public on the property taxes of that community.
Correct.
Each kid would have an open shot. I was in Trenton not long ago, and lawmakers pointed to Abbott and say, see, you can throw all the money you want at per pupil funding, and it doesn't translate into the results. The same schools that were in trouble before, even the more money we spent, we didn't get a return on investment. How would you answer that?
And that's actually wrong what those politicians say in Abbott, because when Abbott was fully funded, New Jersey virtually erased the graduation gap between white and African American boys. New Jersey actually, right now, and for the past few years, has reneged on its Abbott funding. Yep. But when it was implementing Abbott faithfully, it actually translated into better outcomes for kids, better outcomes in test scores, better outcomes in graduation rates, and in better learning. And that has been borne out. In fact, a new study by the National Bureau of Economic Research done by Kirabu Jackson, a professor at Northwestern, has shown that school finance reform has increased graduation rates. That means the type of finance reform that happened in Abbott has increased graduation rates. A 20% increase in funding has increased graduation rates by 23% precisely in poor kids.
But you've been invested in this subject for a long time. If I said, okay, you know what? I'm giving you the entire settlement, Wendy. You can spend it any way you want. Would you spend it within the school walls? And I mean that in a broad sense, from the breakfast programs for the kids who need it, the lunches, the after-school programs, to give them as fair a shot as we can have? Or would you say, you know what, I'm going to invest this more in social services so that these at-risk kids, they got a place to go after school sometimes. We're going to do counseling so the parents are more invested, let's say, necessarily, or we're going to have more drug abuse or psychiatric, whatever the case may be. Is it better on the outside of the school walls, or if you have to choose either or inside the school wall?
You really need both, and I'll explain why. I mean, when I've spoken to superintendents across New York State for my work, so often we talk about the counselors that are cut, the guidance counselors they need, what these kids live through. They have parents who are incarcerated, they haven't eaten, they haven't been able to wash their clothes, they live in houses with cardboard instead of glass. You know, we're expecting these kids to focus on a writing prompt when they have all these other aspects in their lives. So whether it be in school or out of school, they need those social services, they need counselors, they need enough food, they need housing security. So we do need a lot of social interventions.
Yep.
We also need school interventions because, for example, things like preschool and small class size have been proven to not only improve academic outcomes later on and save money in the long run, but also to improve life outcomes.
In Connecticut, there's going to have to decision made in Hartford here on this, and obviously with the legal aspect of it, obviously incumbent on. You mentioned even in your piece, Governor Malloy is going to be able to point to, see, test scores have gone up here, graduation rates have gone up over in recent years. We don't need this additional program here with this additional funding and modeling, I guess, for per pupil funding. Why would you say he's wrong?
Well, you know, you can also very easily play fast and loose with graduation rates. Sometimes there's these credit recovery that are really allow kids to take the same class over and over again until they pass it. Are they really doing well?
Yep.
You know, what the constitutional requirement is in Connecticut, and it's very similar to constitutional requirements across the country. Our children have to, our state must provide an education that enables our children to be capable and responsible citizens who can vote intelligently, serve on a jury knowledgeably, and in Connecticut also be able to get gainful employment and proceed to higher education. And I think the evidence is going to show that the children in these most underfunded school districts have not been able to meet those standards.
You turn to a certain channel, you're going to hear very frequently that public education is basically the ruinization of America, and any more money going into it is throwing good money after bad. The short answer is, read the report, the math doesn't add up, right?
Exactly.
Right.
The services aren't there.
I wish you the best of luck here in the suit, Wendy, and I also appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. We jump to a quick break, but when we come back, the table and I will talk about a new court battle over Obamacare. However, when all is said and done, new policy, grab onto something now, it actually seems to be working despite the attacking from conservative pundits on a daily, if not hourly basis. So the question is, we look at the numbers, where are all those naysayers now?